Okay, let's go to Chapter 5, Intermediate Sanctions and Community Corrections. What are intermediate sanctions? Well, intermediate sanctions is another way of saying a better alternative to going to prison. So they are sanctions that in restrictiveness and punitiveness lie between traditional probation and traditional imprisonment, or alternatively between imprisonment and traditional parole. So, what does all that mean? It just means that these are punishments that are stricter than standard probation, but not as strict as going to prison. So, you've got this diagram that shows you traditional probation, and then intermediate sanctions are those gray areas, and then incarceration. So usually if someone is doing a traditional probation and is having problems staying on probation or abiding by the rules, instead of sending someone to prison by revoking that probation, the judge will add on more restrictions to avoid having to send someone to jail or to prison. So intermediate sanctions just lies in the middle. Next, intermediate sanctions. So how many are there? Well, you see in the orange diagram how many there are. There's probation, like a standard probation, and then you have intensive supervision. You have the drug courts, restitution and fines, community service, day reporting, remote location monitoring, or better known as GPS monitoring or ankle monitoring, residential entry centers, boot camp, and then jail or prison. So these are all alternatives that can be used by the courts to keep someone from going to prison. So the courts are going to give you every chance possible to stay out of prison. And if someone is not able to stay on probation, then of course that probation is going to get revoked and they are going to be sent to prison for whatever the judge deems, whether it be a technical violation or it be a new charge that the defendant has. I've got 4 videos there that show you some different intermediate sanctions. Go ahead and look over those. Next slide. What is the value of intermediate sanctions? Well, first of all, we have to bring up the subject of economic reality. So remember that economic reality has to do with inflation. What state is the economy in? How much does everything cost right now? Are we in a recession? It deals with all of that. So when looking at economic reality, we must see the value because it's going to cost taxpayers more to house an inmate in the county jail or the state prison system than it is for them to be on probation. So, in the long run, and when we look at economic reality, it is more feasible for taxpayers to foot the bill for probation costs rather than footing the bill for prison. Intermediate sanctions offer alternatives to incarceration. It's like a second chance to do right. And in some cases, it can even be a third chance to do right. When you have someone who is not able to abide by the rules of their probation, and of course, they do not want to go to jail or to prison, the judge may assign some intermediate sanctions on top of that. So let's say it's a DWI and they are caught again. And the first sentence ended with a traditional probation with drug testing, but no jail time. And then he or she is caught again, second DWI. It may end up in intermediate probation where you have more restrictions like scram. That is where you have to wear an ankle bracelet, and it's a device that measures the amount of alcohol in your system. They could also put you on a driving device where your vehicle is locked unless you blow into it to allow the ignition to start. Usually with DWIs, it is a three strikes you're out law, which means if you get a third DWI, you probably are going to go to state jail. That is not always the case, but in most cases, that is how it is. By offering this, it keeps the individual from being incarcerated and does two things: eases jail overcrowding, eases taxpayer burden, and it allows the individual to stay in the community employed. I guess that's three things, not two things. So it allows for the freedom of someone to continue working, to be in the community, and be with their family. Next slide. The value of intermediate sanctions. Criminal justice officials can use intermediate sanctions to teach persons convicted of crime to take accountability for their actions and heightening their chances for success in the community. Again, it is a value that is placed not only monetarily, but psychologically as well. Because we have to look at it from the taxpayer view, but we also have to look at it from the defendant's view. Of course, no one wants to go to jail or to prison. And so if you were not able to stay on a traditional probation, they're going to give you even more restrictions. Now, some may ask, well, if they can't stay on a traditional probation, what's going to make them stay on a probation that has even um, more conditions placed on them? And that's very true. It's all going to depend on the person. How much do they want to stay out of jail or prison? So it is going to be up to that individual. When the public is made aware of the possible range of punishments and is given information about how and with whom they are used, they support alternatives to our incarceration. So when you look at it in a public view, of course, they're going to want to go with the one that is going to cost less money than what is going to cost more money. So again, economic reality. There are three short videos there that you can look at that explains more on the incarceration over probation and revocation. Next slide. What is economic reality? So, as we said before, when we look at economic reality, we're looking at the cost of everything. Economically, it is the actual state of things, especially when it is difficult or unpleasant. For example, what we bring home in pay may not be sufficient to pay all the bills, even if the general economy is looking up. We are having to do more with less. What $50 worth of groceries bought a year ago is not the same as what it buys today. So that is economic reality. When we go to the grocery store and we see that the box of cereal that we normally buy has gone up by $1.20, that's economic reality. Inflation. A lot of times they try to use psychological factors or methods in that the price will stay the same for something, but there'll be less of it. So let's keep on using cereal as an example. So the cereal that you buy at the store, maybe it costs $3.29 and it still costs $3.29, but you notice that the box is a little bit smaller. And that's because they have limited the amount of cereal that they are putting in the boxes now. So to have the public think that they or that we are not having to pay more than what we were before. But in reality, we are. So they do it all the time in the grocery stores. Next slide. Community corrections, definition and scope. Community corrections is sometimes referred to as non-institutional corrections. It is a subfield of corrections in which offenders are supervised and provided services outside jail or prison. So a lot of times when we talk about corrections, people kind of associate corrections with jail or with prison, but it goes far beyond that. It is any time that someone who has been convicted of a crime must be supervised. So, probation would be part of corrections. Intermediate sanctions would be part of corrections. Of course, jail time, prison time would be part of corrections, and also parole. So, if someone has been doing, let's say, 10 years on a burglary sentence, and they have been granted parole. They've done 7 years on that sentence, and they still have 3 years left to go on that sentence, but they have been allowed to parole out of the system. So, what does that mean? Does that mean that their sentence stops? No, it just means that, like probation, they are able to stay out in the community without being behind bars. So, in a sense, it's like giving them a chance to get out early to see if they can do right. So, that is all part of the scope of community corrections. Community corrections, the philosophy. Community corrections is a system of supervision of individuals convicted of crimes within the community instead of sentencing them to jail or prison. So, again, it is like it goes beyond incarceration. It includes probation. Involves intermediate sanctions. It involves parole. It also involves incarceration, but it goes far beyond that scope. Um, and the philosophy is for decentralization of authority from state to local level. So instead of putting them in the state prison, let's keep them at the county level. Citizen participation in program planning. So let's have citizens participate in planning programs, in designing and implementing and evaluating, redefining the population of individual for who incarceration is most appropriate. So let's redefine what it means. Let's redefine who that person is. Well, how do we do that? We do that by putting an emphasis on rehabilitation through community programs. For example, if you have someone who has been stopped and convicted of DWI, and this is their first DWI, so the judge gives them a standard probation with the condition that they attend Alcoholics Anonymous. This is a community program. This is set to help that person rehabilitate, and hopefully that program can set that person on a different path that will redefine that person in the population. As a system, community corrections also has incorporation of alliances. So there are partners that help with community corrections. For example, community policing. Remember, that is when law enforcement officers establish and develop relationships with the community in which they patrol. So all officers have their certain jurisdictions within the city. There are certain patrol areas. Um, and what community policing is all about is helping to establish those roles between police and community members so that they can come together and have a good relationship, so that when there is crime being committed, community members are going to come forward and talk to police about it. They're not going to be afraid to approach police. So it's basically a strategy that within law enforcement that gets residents involved in their neighborhood and what is going on. Community-based prosecution, a prosecution strategy that uses a combination of criminal and civil tactics and the legal expertise, resources, and clout of the prosecuting attorney's office to find innovative solutions to a neighborhood's specific problems. So, what does all that mean? Well, that just means that the state has a hand in coming up with tactics, coming up with ways that they can find in order to address a specific neighborhood's problem or help them solve a particular problem. And then we have community-based defender services, a defender strategy that provides continuity in representation of individuals who are indigent, and help with personal and family problems. When we talk about individuals who are indigent, who are we talking about a lot of the times? A lot of the times we're talking about homeless people. We're talking about people who are out in the community, in our community, who are homeless. And this community-based offender program does help with that. But not only that, it helps with personal and family problems that can lead to legal troubles. For example, if you have a husband and wife who have had law enforcement called to their home because there's fighting. So this may help them get into some kind of counseling so that it can avoid legal problems in the future. And then community courts, a judicial strategy of hearing a criminal case in the community that is most affected by the case and including that community in case disposition. Basically, that means that this crime that is committed is more affected in this particular area of town. For example, this area of town may have a lot of problems with drugs and the dealing of drugs. So community courts is going to come up with strategies that may help that community and lower the amount of drug dealing that is done. And that's where all that problem solving comes in. Next slide. Oh, that's it. That's it for this particular chapter. We will go on to, well, there is one. Sorry about that. It's not allowing me to go forward. Sorry about that, guys. There was one more slide. What are Community Corrections Acts, the CCAs? In the spirit of collaboration and partnership, many states are passing Community Correction Acts. These CCAs are state laws that give grants to local communities to build policy framework that is evidence-based and focuses on reducing the prison population. So basically what this is these are laws that help communities to build policies, to make regulations. And it's evidence-based. And we've talked about evidence-based practices. Evidence-based practices are practices that have been shown to work. So that's what these CCAs are centered around factual evidence that shows that one particular program may be working within the community. The state of Texas does have one such act, as stated in section 509.016 of the Prison Diversion Progressive Sanctions Program. This act allows localities to develop programs that meet local needs. The act helps defendants make restitution to victims. The act promotes efficiency in community-based correctional programs, and the act establishes standards for community corrections facilities, programs, and operations. So this is very important. These aren't things that we normally think about when we're talking about community corrections, but there is a lot of money involved. There is a lot at stake. And so this act allows for the local government to be able to help with the success of probation. And it establishes standards by which facilities must abide by. Okay, so that's it for this chapter.